K-State was lucky to have him. They were super lucky to have him. He could have been hired anywhere, and he got hired by K-State uh, in what was a fantastic move at the time by an outgoing interim director. I mean, they were so lucky to have been able to get somebody of that high quality, not just a professional, but a person. And so I think that K-State, Kansas State really didn't really know what they had until he was gone. And for many parts of the university, he passed away, and actually we notified. My wife and I are friends with the Lintons, and so we notified Sally Linton, his wife, and Richard Linton's wife, the president of the university, and said, "Hey, we want you to know that this person has passed away, and I don't even know if you had ever met him, but take a look." And uh, the president of the university went and started learning about Ian, and basically then contacted Marjorie and said, "I wish I had known him better. I wish I had known what a gem we had here at university." I think that really he was so focused on the students that a lot of the rest of the university didn't really get it. They didn't really get it. And that was their loss. The legacy is going to be with the students. So the legacy is going to be with the students who he helped and touched. When we had his memorial service in March, we had students from all over the country come back who he had helped in this short time. He was only here for about 5 years. And in that time, he had a number of assistant officers. He had a number of people in the radio hierarchy, or people that he taught in class, and but people that he helped, people that he touched in some manner with his ideas and uh, and enthusiasm. And that his legacy, I think, is going to be those who take that idea of belonging and idea of acceptance and move that through into the next stage of their lives. And as they move through their careers and through their life personally as well, to really take those ideas and values and move those forward. Yeah, that was just so cool. I remember the night that he got inducted into the Kansas Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Former K-Stater and a big donor Ed Klimek had put his name in, who was also on the board of the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, an old radio owner, and he was elected as the Distinguished Service Award recipient, and it comes with an automatic induction into the Kansas Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame. And Ian gave his speech, and the speech was really an epic look back at his career, his philosophy, how he felt about people, what his values were. And I think it was the first time that a lot of people outside his inner circle really understood how serious it was. He ended it basically saying, "I hope this isn't my farewell. I hope this is just a stop along the way." It ended up being his farewell. And then finding out that this year they're naming a new award after him. It's the Kansas Association of Broadcasters Media Educators Award, the Ian Punnett Media Educators Award. He's going to be the first one to receive it posthumously, and then it'll be given out on a yearly basis. And really, that to me, that he would be, I think, horrified in that while he liked to be the center of attention, if you knew Ian, he didn't want to be that much the center of attention. But he would also be, I think he would feel extremely honored, as well as glad that other educators were going to be recognized. Making sure that educators are recognized was also a big deal for him, and that's why he was so involved with the Kansas Association of Broadcasters too.
Well, Ian was a radio savant, which means that he knew and understood audio like a great artist understands paint and color. And so he was very hands-on in creating the little pieces of bells and whistles that would make it go from a very accomplished student radio station to the top radio station. Because all those little pieces that we add in that make it more professional give it a lot of life. Also, he pushed the students to take chances. And by doing that, they created some really interesting types of things, whether it's a podcast about Dungeons and Dragons or sports talk radio, or being aggressive and going on the road and covering K-State sports, being the home voice, the student voice for the athletic teams, those kind of things. So that, along with the creative genius, then really helped the entire place kind of move up to that next level. It went from being a club and a fun thing to do to being actual serious content creation and community service. And that, I think, were the hallmarks of that. So under his leadership, then, those things then become much more apparent to those who are outside. So awards are great. I mean, we always clean up pretty well at the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, which is for everybody, all the universities in Kansas. We totally dominate those categories for that and for Channel 8. But getting national recognition is something else. And Ian led the way. This year at the Broadcast Education Association, BEA, which is a national organization, he's going to receive a couple of different awards for the things that he personally did for Wildcat 91.9, some opens and some special pieces that they put on the air. And so he modeled that. We're going to win awards. We're going to do great things. And so the students believed that through that leadership, they were going to be able to do that.
The faculty sometimes didn't know how to take him. Because he was so student focused, and the same I would say is for me, sometimes those goals clash with the goals of other faculty. He's very collegial. I think everybody really liked him, but he didn't really have time for those relationships as much. He had a few relationships on faculty that he felt were worth his time, that he fostered. But for the most part, he'd 10 times out of 10 rather spend those extra hour with a student and working through an issue, helping that person succeed, rather than spending time with faculty members. Didn't like meetings, wasn't wild about that, and any chance that he had to speak in a meeting was going to be student focused. That's not how academics always works, so that made it a little bit tough for some academics. But for sure, I think that everybody understood his expertise and his vision for the students. And even if it couldn't be emulated by other members on the faculty because of very often just because of other responsibilities, didn't have time to do that kind of thing. It certainly was very appreciated.
So I was here for about 18 months before Ian came. So we had really been looking at redoing a lot of the things that had been happening at K-State. And the guy before me, we had an intern before me, but the guy before him didn't have any content creation, was an old photog. And so he was really good at those kind of issues, but was not really a content guy. And so when I came in, we were looking to really change a lot of the way that we were doing things. We were still very old school. So we needed to move kind of things into the future. And I've been here about 18 months. And then Ian actually reached out to me when he was in the interview process. I was on my way to study abroad in Italy. And he emailed me. And it turned out that we had a common friend. This guy named Dr. Bill Silcock, who at the time was a professor at Arizona State University. He's now retired. He was also the news director, the similar position to what I'm doing now, at Brigham Young University when I went to undergraduate school in the early 90s. And so he said that Dr. Bill knew that I was there and that I'd shoot straight. And so he contacted me, and we corresponded a little bit during the early time of his application. But then I was overseas when they hired him. Jean Folkerts hired him. Was one of the last things that she did as interim director of the school. Hired him over the summer for him to start in January of the next year. So he was hired as an instructor and as chief operator for KSDB-FM. So he had just gotten a doctorate, so he was a PhD, which is the first time in a long time they'd had a PhD in that position. But he also had such a long personal radio career, and continuing, because he was still on national radio. So that then transformed into a professor of practice. Now we are looking in the A.Q. Miller School. We view those who have 10 or more years of experience not as just simple instructors, but as professors of practice. And so that changed into a professor of practice, all the while being the chief operator of KSDB-FM. So it was very interesting because he came here by himself, because his wife was a very successful television producer in Arizona at the time. And so she was still working there. So he came and bought a house and was there by himself. So he really didn't have a lot of people that he knew. And so we became friends simply because of our connection with the television and radio stations. And then I would go over to lunch at his place, and he was an amazing cook. So he would just whip something up that he had in the fridge. And I remember one day he was like, I'm just going to make shrimp and grits for you. I'm like, okay. So he was always very good at hosting. And so that was kind of the entree into this was we would talk a little bit about certain types of things and then just talk about life. And because he was there alone and he didn't have a lot of folks to talk to. And so similarly, I didn't have a lot of what I would consider peers in the area. Academia is a very interesting beast because academia rewards academics. And that's kind of the whole way this is structured. So if you get the PhD and if you're, have 15, 20 years in academics, that's how you succeed in academics. If you're in industry and you come into academics, it's a little bit of a different ballgame. Most of what you've done previously isn't really considered quite on the same level as someone who has done a lot of academics. So he and I bonded quickly over the fact that we both had 25 and 30-year careers that we knew counted for something, but not quite as much as what some of the other professors perhaps had or did. And so we were able to really bond, I think, over our industry experiences much more than any kind of academic pieces that we were looking at. So for those first couple of years while he was living here by himself, we would often, go to lunch and do things socially. But then part of that social outlay then started morphing into, well, what can we do for the students? And Ian was always 100% student focused. He was also a great self-promoter, but he wanted the same success for his students. So he's always looking for awards. What are ways that he can stretch students? He also is brutally honest. So one of the great things about Ian is that you always kind of knew where you stood. So if you did a piece that he thought was not that great, he would tell you. There's a great story from a guy named Colin Settle, who was our sports director. He was the sports editor for the paper. He was also did a radio show. He did his first radio show and gave it to Ian. And Ian said, well, Colin, that first show was a great American tragedy. Let's talk about how you can make this actually listenable. And off he went. And so he was very pragmatic in that way. Didn't care so much for your feelings, except he cared for you as a person. So he's a very holistic person. So he was very much in people's lives and in what they were doing, and knew the situations of people and knew where he could push the buttons, where he was going to have to back off a little. But he also knew potential. And so if he thought you had more potential, he was going to start pushing you, maybe with two hands on your rear end, pushing you up, not literally, just figuratively, pushing you toward whatever it was that he thought you could do. For some students, that was a little uncomfortable, but for others, they really took a great opportunity to make something, not just of themselves, but make content that they didn't think that they could do previously. I think we developed kind of a camaraderie with that and came up with things that didn't necessarily always work. But I think things that moved us forward in making sure that the student, when they walk out the door, had enough different kinds of experiences that they, A, had some skills, B, knew what they wanted to do, and C, felt supported and empowered that they could do it. And that was, again, something that Ian was excellent at, was empowering students and saying, hey, you can do it. He came up with the slogan for Wildcat 91.9, You Belong. And that was, I think, a real pivot point in our student media with regards to the radio station, where you move into not just community service, which is what a radio station is. It's community service. It does news, it does weather alerts, it does stories, provides entertainment, all these kind of things. But then you become a socially empathetic part of a community where you are now trying to empathize with those who maybe feel like they're on the outside. And so he came up with that slogan, We Belong. And then we started moving that into figuring out how are we going to do that and put that through a number of different things. We created a not really a company, I guess, just an organization called Wildcat Electronic Media, where we started sharing students, content, different kinds of projects and ways to do things. And he was always very adventurous. Ian was the big idea guy. And then I would try to make it practically work. And so that was kind of how a lot of that went, and often those big ideas bumped up against a lot of things. And my job was to clear the decks and smooth the way and make sure that we could get those things done. He was very collaborative, and seemed like every few days I'd get a text, and I need a consult. Okay, Tommy said, "Here's what I'm thinking. Is that Humanly possible? No. But what we could do is, and then we chat it out. And creating those pieces, trying to put together all the issues with the pandemic, the limited budget, the struggles that the students were going through. I mean, and students have had such a tough last 5-6 years that we had to be really cognizant of that and make sure that everything that we did fit with the way they felt accepted, and how they wanted their part of this life to go. And those were, I think, challenging, but I think very rewarding too.
Ian was very fond of what I called IPGs. So IPGs were Ian Punnett grants. And so I've had students who said, oh yeah, I remembered Ian, and there was this semester and I was doing terribly, and he found some money, he found a grant for me to get therapy. And I said, that wasn't a grant, they paid for that. And very often he did that. After the pandemic was over, we started an organization at the time, A.Q. Miller Journalism and Mass Communications, called JMC Cares. JMC Cares was a fund, and still is a fund to a certain extent, which was going to financially help students who had their education derailed by the pandemic. So whether it was, my computer busted and I can't afford a new one, whether it was I can't make rent, I have to pay my CASIS bill, so I can't make rent, or whether it was food, or my car got in a wreck and I can't get to and from school anymore, whatever it was, we managed to fundraise and got tens of thousands of dollars and started helping students who really had a tough time coming back from the pandemic. A lot of them couldn't work over the summer, so came back from school and said, I was supposed to make 10 grand this summer and I made $2,000 and now I can't afford X. And we're not going to give them 10 grand to replace that, but what is the X? I can't make rent. How much is your rent? Let's pay for some rent. And so we did that over and over 3 or 4 years until we finally ran out of money. But the goal was to spend it all, and we did. And so I think there were a lot of students that were helped by that, and knowing their circumstances was important. Everybody who got helped had an interview. And by interview, I just mean a discussion with either me or with Ian, saying, hey, tell me what's going on in your life. We want to know about you. We want to know what your struggles are. What are you having trouble with? What are your what's actually a problem? What is not really a problem? What's going to help you? What kind of thing do we do? Instead of giving a hand out, we want to give you a hand up. So let's pull you up out of wherever you are, get you back on your feet, and then you'll be able to handle it. And Ian, for his part, went even over and above that from time to time of, well, I think this person just needs this, and it would just show up. I remember we were at a Royals game last year, and one of the students said, I've never had a big foam hand. Wouldn't that be fun? And 3 minutes later, there was a big foam hand sitting at her seat at the Royals game that Ian just went over to the pro shop and bought and brought over and said, now your dream has come true. He used to do that kind of thing all the time. It was always number one. So he always was not only had it top of mind, but actually walking that walk, whether it's calling somebody, being out where he hated being in his office. He wanted to be in the conference room of the radio station because everybody was filtering in and out of the conference room. And that's where things were going on. That's where he could meet and greet and talk to people and talk to students. And I think that his own life and his values, both morally, religiously, really were towards service, very service oriented. He was an ordained minister, and that was kind of that. Then when he became an academic, which he admittedly did very late in life, he was more than 60 when he got his doctorate and moved into academics. That bled over into where's my service lie, and this is where my service lies. My service lies with these students, with his flock, with his group of radio kids who, a lot of them had no idea what they were doing, and that was just fine. But that was going to be what he wanted to make sure he did. The impact that I saw that he made on students was giving them a place to belong. He lived the slogan, "We belong," for Wildcat 91.9. A lot of students come through those radio doors who don't belong anywhere on campus. And they might be a little neurodivergent. They might have some kind of malady, physical or mental illness. And he always made sure that every single person that came through those doors knew that they belonged here, that they had a family here, and that they were going to be supported in whatever they felt that they wanted to do. And to me, that was always the biggest thing that he gave them, was that sense of belonging, and felt like they were being cared about by somebody other than their family members, and somebody from an academic standpoint that most of the time students don't feel. And that was really important. So he had been feeling up and down, and trying to lose weight, and wanted to get back to being healthy. And we wanted to. I was kind of with him saying, "Well, we'll play tennis at some point." And so I finally dragged him out to play tennis in early fall of 23, and it lasted about 9 minutes, and then ended up not collapsing on the court. He made it to the edge of the court and laid down in the grass and said, "I am not well. I don't feel well. I have no energy. My coordination is off. I'm having trouble concentrating." And he said, "I think it's time to maybe we look a little deeper." And he said, "Oh yeah, I think maybe." And he was he was used to having very little sleep. He was used to not being super healthy. As an overnight radio host, you don't sleep very much. You're eating when you can, and so I think he had, throughout his life, he had made it normative to feel bad. And so when it finally got to where he was feeling bad, and it was really bad, I think that he, just kind of, it'll work out. It'll all work out. Um, he started getting diagnosed, and they started looking for different things that were going on, and they were checking with the heart first, because I had some heart problems. And I said, "Well, it sounds like it's the heart." The doctor agreed. They checked the heart. The heart was fine. They started moving to other things, until they finally were able to narrow in. And it took a couple of months to narrow in, and we didn't know, but by that time he only had a couple months left to live. And then they started working to get him onto a liver donor list when they finally realized that his liver was not going to last. They thought he'd had 18 months, maybe 2 years of liver expectancy left, and as it turned out, he didn't. He had much less, obviously, than that. At about in about early October, mid-October, his body just started breaking down, and he was having trouble coming to classes. When we got into November, he was having to do a lot of things online. I would come over on Sunday nights to watch football, and that was kind of a lot of his only sociality for the last month or so. Is we'd go and we'd watch football games and tell stories, and meanwhile his body was kind of betraying him. He had a lot of pain, lots of different cramping, and the liver is the filter for the body, and so you couldn't throw even painkillers at it because they filter through the liver, and so it was going to be bad for it. And so his body couldn't clear fluids, and he just really started just declining. And even though he was getting a lot of great medical treatment, it just was not in time. It was actually about 36 hours before he passed away, he found out that he was going to be on the liver list, the liver donation list, which is not easy to get on. And when he went to the hospital for that last time, I FaceTimed him in the hospital, and he gave me the news, and we cried together and said, "All right, man, you got a shot. This gives you a chance." And within 36 hours, he was gone. So he never really got, I don't think, that chance. But he was always so optimistic. He was very optimistic. I kept saying, "Look, we're going to take a break. I'm going to release you from your teaching load. Let's focus on getting healthy." No, 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 no. The students need me, and I need the students, and I need the students. So he wouldn't let me take him off any classes. He wanted to continue to be involved in day to day, even as his health continued to decline. And that he just said, "Well, look, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to get a liver. And within 2 months after getting a liver, I'm going to be back up and out, and I'm going to be fine. We'll be playing tennis again by the summer." And even the day before he passed away, he was still so positive, and trying to be so positive for everybody in his life. His wife Marjorie, I think, is a little bit more of a realist, and so we went on a different kind of a journey with her, my wife and I, as she was on the other side trying to come to terms with what seemed to be an eventuality, and that was really hard to do. And I remember getting the call from Marjorie. It's 7 a.m. Telling me that Ian was gone, and we just cried together on the phone, and it was just so heart-wrenching because we didn't expect it. Ian was so positive. We thought, there's no way. There's too many people pulling for him. There's just too many people that want him to be there. And when he passed, it was, while expected, it was totally unexpected. And so I think that has been one of the toughest things. I still text him, so I'll still text his phone every once in a while. Hey, buddy, I need a consult. Well, I wish you were here. Wish we could talk about this, or I'll email him, or I'll do those kind of things. You know, I often, think now that I'm in his place, so to speak, certainly not a replacement, but in his place, that I really tried to emulate and mirror a lot of the things that I saw him doing. We were very closely aligned anyway, but that to me is, I think, is his lasting legacy, is if we can change some of the ways that we help and love each other, and that was always his number one goal, was to make sure people knew that they belonged, even up until the very, very end. As an adult, it's hard to have really good friends, and so I went for years without having a lot of friends. I mean, you kind of go through your life, and then when you meet somebody who shares some similar values, and you start to work on things together, you become friends. And so Ian and I became great friends. He was Uncle Ian to my kids. Once there was a tornado warning at the high school, and my daughter sheltered at his house. She parked in his driveway for the first 2 months that she had her license, because she didn't want to have to buy a parking pass at the high school. We take care of their cat. He was almost like a pseudo counselor to my kids as they were in their teenage years. So our families were close. And so the other devastating part about losing Ian was not just losing him as an educator and as an academic, as a colleague, but he was my best friend. So that is what I miss the most, is having somebody I can just call and shoot the breeze with, go watch football with, go play tennis with, do whatever, and have lunch. I mean, maybe have lunch regularly. And to me, not having him in my life and my family's life is one of the toughest outcomes of this whole thing for me. Everybody copes a little bit differently with grief and with tragedy and with what happens to them. I am a fairly resilient person, but I've had a number of times in the last 3 months where things have just been overwhelming, and you just got to shut things down, surround yourself with your loved ones, cry, hold on to your family, and do those kind of things. Knowing what Ian stood for and what he and I were building, I've also continued those pieces, to build those pieces, whether it's creating Wildcat Electronic Media as a more viable entity, whether it's keeping going with the awards and the other things that we won, whether it's continuing some of the other works that we've done together. All those things give me comfort. We're close to his widow, Marjorie, as well, and so we've been grieving with her. And so, every couple of days we touch base and find out how she's doing, and find out if she's able to, where she is in her coping. And we've been strong for her, and that has been helped me be strong for me and for the students. The first radio class we had back, we spent an hour and 20 minutes maybe with students just expressing how they felt. We brought some folks in from the university, some counselors and things like that, who said some stuff, and then I just moved them to the side, and we just shared and talked, and allowed ourselves to feel, and allowed ourselves to grieve. And you have to have a way to let that out, and a way to deal with those things. I like to feel like I've got what I term as an eternal perspective, whether that is what's coming in the next life, or what has happened in this life, and legacy, and things like that. And so that's helped me. My faith has helped me. But the students, I think, probably more than anything else, are what have helped. And that those relationships, and deepening those relationships, continuing those relationships, and sometimes you have to just be the grown-up in the room, and sometimes it's me, sometimes it's not me, sometimes it's somebody, sometimes a student's the grown-up in the room, depending on how we're feeling. And that has been, I think, very nurturing and helpful, as I've taken on a lot of different roles. But again, I put it through the same filter every time. What's best for the student? what's best for the student. And sometimes that's not even the best for me, and that's fine. And that's just the way I live my life. Well, we have a memorial fund in his name, but we're also probably going to rebrand JMC Cares and name it after Ian and make it the Ian Punnett Cares Fund, or the SMC Cares Fund, the Punnett Fund, because I think that was what he was all about, was helping students in so many different ways, whether it was helping students feel that they belong somewhere, whether it's helping students materially, financially, whether it was helping them emotionally, whether it was helping them professionally, whether it was whatever it was, that's what he wanted to do. And hopefully that is something that continues on. We've had a lot of leadership changes and a lot of changes in our department lately, and hopefully that'll settle down and we'll be able to really feel like that's a good, honored part of what we do. I think it would be that Ian understood. So he understood what it was like to be in people's place. Ian was very empathetic. He understood the struggles that students were having. He understood what it was like to be broke, because he was broke for a lot of his life. He understood what neurodivergence was, because he was neurodivergent himself. He understood what it meant to be alone. He was an overnight singular radio host in a dark room with a pair of headphones for hours at a time. He understood that, and that empathy and that feeling of understanding and belonging, I think, is what I would characterize it with.